knocked on his carriage door. The cold bit through his gloves as the Duke of Ashford gripped the edge of the tiny coffin. His fingers had gone numb an hour ago. He did not move them. The winter of 1842 had come early to the Yorkshire estate. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets across the chapel grounds, covering the turned earth that would soon swallow the last piece of his heart. Inside the small casket lay nothing but ash and the remnants of a child's nightshirt. No body, no face to kiss goodbye, just the charred evidence of what the fire had taken. Your Grace, the vicar is waiting. Alexander Winters, 7th Duke of Ashford, did not respond to his steward's voice. His eyes remained fixed on the silver locket resting atop the white satin lining. Inside that locket was a curl of golden hair, the only thing left of his son that the flames had not touched. He had cut it himself on the boy's 4th birthday, just 3 months ago. Thomas had squirmed and giggled, asking why Papa needed his hair. To remember you by, Alexander had said, laughing. He had not known how soon he would need it. The fire had started in the East Wing nursery just after midnight. The servants said it was an accident. A candle left burning. A curtain catching flame. By the time they reached the room, the entire corridor was an inferno. The governess had died trying to reach Thomas. They found her body in the hallway, collapsed mere feet from the nursery door. They found nothing of his son but ash. Alexander forced his fingers to release the coffin edge. His hands were shaking. He could not remember the last time his hands had shaken. Not during the war. Not when his wife had died bringing Thomas into the world. Not ever. But now they trembled like leaves in a storm. The vicar's voice began the funeral rites, but Alexander heard nothing. He was back in that moment 5 nights ago when his cousin Edmund had burst into his study, face blackened with smoke, voice hoarse from screaming. The nursery, Your Grace, the nursery is on fire. We cannot reach the boy. Alexander had run. He had torn through the corridors of Ashford Hall like a man possessed. He had reached the east wing to find it consumed by flames so hot they melted the window glass. His men had held him back, 4 of them. He had fought them with the strength of madness, screaming his son's name into the roaring fire until his voice gave out. They had not let him inside. They had saved his life and destroyed it in the same act. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The vicar's words drifted through the snow. Alexander looked up at the assembled mourners. His household staff, dressed in black, faces gray with shock and sorrow. His cousin Edmund, standing at the back, eyes red-rimmed but dry. Edmund had lost his own children to fever 2 years prior. He knew this grief. Or so he claimed. Alexander's gaze lingered on Edmund for a moment. His cousin had been the one to suggest moving Thomas to the East Wing nursery. More sunlight, he had said. Better for a growing boy. Alexander had agreed without thought. Why would he question it? Edmund was family. Edmund was trustworthy. But now, in the aftermath, small details scraped at the edges of Alexander's mind like rats in the walls. The governess had been new, hired on Edmund's recommendation. The candles in that wing were of a cheaper quality than the rest of the house. Also Edmund's doing, a cost-saving measure he had proposed. And Edmund stood to inherit everything if Thomas was gone. Alexander's jaw clenched. No, grief was poisoning his thoughts, turning him suspicious and mad. Edmund had wept when they pulled the governess's body from the wreckage. Edmund had organized the search through the ashes himself, sifting for any remains to bury. Edmund had brought him the locket with Thomas's hair, preserved in his own study drawer. How convenient, whispered a dark voice in Alexander's mind. How perfectly convenient. Your Grace, the vicar's hand touched his shoulder. It is time. The coffin was lowered into the frozen ground. Alexander watched it descend, watched the snow begin to cover it, watched the gravediggers step forward with their spades. He did not weep, he had no tears left. They had burned away with his son. When it was finished, the mourners dispersed. They offered condolences he did not hear. They touched his arm with sympathy he could not feel. One by one, they retreated to the warmth of Ashford Hall, leaving him alone in the snow beside a grave that held only ash and lies. Edmund was the last to approach. Alexander, you must come inside, you will catch your death. I have already caught it. Alexander's voice was hollow, a sound from a tomb. The boy would not want you to suffer like this. Alexander turned to face his cousin. Edmund's expression was perfectly crafted sorrow, concern, familial love, but in his eyes, Alexander saw something else. Something that vanished the moment it was noticed. A relief. Get away. Why from me? Alexander said quietly. Edmund blinked, cousin I. Get away. Edmund backed away, hands raised in placation, and disappeared into the falling snow. Alexander stood alone. The cold sank into his bones. The snow covered his shoulders, his hair, the grave at his feet. He did not move, could not move. The man who had been a loving father, who had read bedtime stories and played tin soldiers on the nursery floor, who had promised his dying wife he would protect their son above all else. That man was being buried in this frozen ground, along with the ash and the locket and the lie. What rose from this gravesite would be something else entirely. Something cold, something unreachable, something that would never, ever love again. 7 years passed like 7 lifetimes. The Duke of Ashford had become a ghost in his own home. He attended Parliament when required. He managed his estates with mechanical precision. He spoke only when necessary, and never about the past. The East Wing remained closed, its charred corridors a monument to a fire that had taken everything. Edmund had moved into Ashford Hall permanently, managing the day-to-day affairs Alexander could no longer stomach. The arrangement suited them both. Edmund gained power. Alexander gained numbness. It was enough, it had to be enough. On a February afternoon in 1849, Alexander's carriage rattled through the East End of London. He had been summoned to review a property acquisition, one of Edmund's schemes to expand their holdings into shipping warehouses. Alexander cared nothing for the business, but the routine of appearing interested kept him moving forward. Movement was survival. The streets here were narrow and filthy. Children in rags darted between carts. Women with hollow eyes sold wilted flowers on corners. The stench of poverty seeped through the carriage windows, rot and smoke and human waste. Alexander stared through the glass without seeing. He had perfected the art of looking without seeing. The carriage lurched to a stop. What is it? Alexander's voice was flat, disinterested. His driver's muffled response came from above. Beggar boy, your grace, blocking the road. I'll move him along. Alexander returned his gaze to the window. This happened often in these streets. Desperate children throwing themselves in front of carriages, hoping for coins. He had long since stopped giving them. Charity was for men who still felt something. Then came the knock. Not on the carriage side, where beggars usually pressed their faces against the glass. This came from the door itself, a small fist striking the polished wood in a deliberate pattern. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock. Alexander's breath stopped. It was a silly game he had played with Thomas during hide and seek, their secret code. 3, 2, 1, and then Papa would find him, would scoop him up laughing, would. Coincidence, it had to be coincidence. The knock came again, 3, 2, 1. Alexander's hand moved before his mind could stop it. He turned the door handle and pushed it open. A boy stood in the mud-slicked street. Perhaps 10 or 11 years old, though malnutrition made age difficult to judge. His clothes were threadbare, his face smudged with soot, his feet bare despite the February cold. He was thin as a rail, his ribs visible through the holes in his shirt. But his eyes. Dear God, his eyes. They were blue, not the common blue of half of England, but a specific shade, the color of a summer sky just before dusk. Alexander had seen those eyes only twice in his life, once in the mirror, once in his son's face. Please, sir, the boy's voice was rough, desperate. I need help, they're coming for me. Alexander found his voice, though it came out harder than he intended. Who is coming for you? The men from the workhouse. I ran. I can't go back. Please. The boy's eyes darted over Alexander's shoulder, scanning the street behind the carriage. I'll work. I'll do anything. I just need. Move along, boy. Alexander's driver had climbed down, his hand reaching for the child. You've bothered his grace enough. Wait. The word left Alexander's mouth before he understood why. The boy looked up at him, really looked. and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or hope, or desperation so profound it mimicked hope. I won't steal, the boy said quickly. I'm not a thief, I'm good with horses. I can read, I can. You can read, Alexander's eyes narrowed. Workhouse children did not read. Yes, sir, someone taught me, a long time ago, before, the boy's voice cracked, before everything. Behind them, shouts erupted. Two men in workhouse uniforms rounded the corner, their faces red with exertion and anger. There's the little rat. The boy's face went white with terror. He grabbed the carriage door with both hands. Please, please, I'll die in there, they'll. Alexander saw the boy's left hand gripping the door frame, saw the back of it, saw. The mark. Time stopped. A birthmark, roughly the shape of a crescent moon, just below the knuckle of the thumb, dark against the pale skin, unmistakable. Thomas had been born with that mark. Alexander had kissed it 1,000 times, had traced it with his finger while his son slept, had noted it in the family Bible as a distinguishing feature, as his father had done for him, as generations of Ashford men had done for their heirs. The Ashford mark, passed down through the male line for 200 years. Impossible. Your Grace, the driver's voice seemed to come from very far away. Shall I send him off? The workhouse men were getting closer. 20 yards, 15. Alexander stared at the boy, at his eyes, at his desperate, dirt-streaked face, at the birthmark that could not exist on anyone but an Ashford. Get in, his voice was barely a whisper. The boy blinked, sir. Get in the carriage. Alexander moved aside, his movements stiff, mechanical. The boy scrambled inside, small and shaking. He pressed himself into the far corner, making himself as small as possible, as if expecting to be thrown back out. The workhouse men reached the carriage, panting. Your Grace, that boy is property of St. Mary's workhouse. He's a runaway. We have legal right to. He is in my carriage now. Alexander's voice was ice and iron, which makes him my concern, not yours. But your Grace, do you wish to argue jurisdiction with a duke? Alexander's eyes fixed on them with the cold fury that had made hardened soldiers step back during the war. I suggest you return to your workhouse. Now. The men exchanged glances. They knew when they were beaten. They retreated, muttering, casting angry glances back at the carriage. Alexander closed the door. The driver, wisely sensing the shift in atmosphere, climbed back to his seat without a word. The carriage lurched into motion. Inside, silence. The boy was pressed against the opposite seat, trembling. Not from cold alone, Alexander realized, from fear, from shock, from whatever hell he had just escaped. Alexander studied him, the shape of his face, the curve of his jaw, the way his hair, matted and filthy as it was, held a hint of gold beneath the grime. It was impossible. Thomas was dead. He had buried his son 7 years ago. This was some street urchin with an unfortunate coincidence of features and a birthmark that meant nothing. Birthmarks were not unique. Blue eyes were not unique. 321 was just a pattern of knocks. But all three together. What is your name? Alexander's voice was carefully controlled. The boy hesitated. His eyes showed the calculation of someone who had learned to lie to survive. But then something in them shifted, a decision made, a risk taken. I don't know, sir. I can't remember. They call me Tommy at the workhouse, but I don't think that's right. I remember someone calling me something else. Something that sounded like that, but wasn't. He swallowed hard. I remember a big house, and a man who read me stories, and a game we played when he came to find me. 3 knocks, then 2, then 1. The world tilted. Alexander's hands gripped the edge of the seat. His vision tunneled. His heart, that dead thing in his chest that had not truly beaten in 7 years, suddenly hammered against his ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. How old are you? 11, I think, maybe 12. I don't know when I was born. Thomas would be 11, would be exactly 11. Where did you come from, before the workhouse? I don't know, the boy's voice grew smaller. I woke up in a place, a bad place. A woman said she found me, said I'd been in an accident. I couldn't remember anything before. She sold me to the workhouse when I was 7 or 8. I've been there ever since. An accident, memory loss, 4 years unaccounted for. Alexander's mind raced. The fire had been assumed fatal because they found no body. Only ash. Only the governess's corpse. They had assumed Thomas burned beyond recognition. But what if he had not been in the room? What if someone had taken him before the fire? What if the fire had been a cover for something else entirely? What if Edmund? No, he could not think that, not yet, not until he knew. What is your name? The boy asked quietly, breaking Alexander from his spiraling thoughts. Alexander looked at the child, at the blue eyes watching him with desperate hope, at the birthmark that marked him as an Ashford, at the ghost of his son sitting across from him in a London carriage. I am the Duke of Ashford, he said slowly, and you are coming home with me. The boy's eyes widened. Home. To my estate, I have questions, many questions. Alexander forced his voice to remain steady, though his hands still shook. You will answer them, and then we will see. And see what, sir? Alexander did not answer, could not answer, because the only honest response would shatter what remained of his sanity. We will see if the dead can return. We will see if my son is sitting across from me. We will see if I have been living in hell for 7 years while he suffered in one of his own. We will see if hope is real, or if this is just another kind of death. The carriage rolled on through London streets, carrying a duke who had buried his heart and a boy who might be its resurrection. If you've ever lost someone you thought was gone forever, stay with this story. Sometimes the impossible knocks twice, and this duke's world is about to shatter. The boy had never seen a bathtub before. He stood in the doorway of the guest chamber, staring at the copper basin filled with steaming water as if it might bite him. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Dawson, waited with clean linens and a patience born of 40 years in service. Go on then, she said gently. You'll catch cold standing there in those rags. The boy, Tommy, as he'd given his name, looked back at the Duke. Alexander stood in the hallway, maintaining the careful distance he'd held since they'd arrived at Ashford Hall 3 hours ago. It's safe, Alexander said, his voice neutral. Mrs. Dawson will help you. I'll have food sent up when you're finished. The boy nodded slowly and stepped inside. The door closed. Alexander remained in the hallway, his hand pressed against the wall, his breathing controlled. Inside his chest, that treacherous thing called hope clawed at his ribs like a trapped animal. He forced it down. He had to remain rational, objective. This boy was not Thomas, could not be Thomas. He was simply a street child with a coincidental resemblance and a birthmark that meant nothing. The Ashford mark appeared in other families. It had too. The world was full of crescent-shaped birthmarks. Your Grace. Alexander turned. Mrs. Dawson had emerged from the room, her face carefully blank, but her hands trembled as they gripped the boy's filthy clothes. Speak, Alexander commanded. The mark on his hand, Your Grace. I saw it when he undressed. She swallowed. I remember that mark. I kissed it myself when the young master was born. I held him in this very hallway when he was 3 days old and his mother. Her voice broke. Your Grace, that boy in there is a stranger, Alexander cut her off. A street child, nothing more. But the mark is a coincidence. The words tasted like ash. You will speak of this to no one. Do you understand? No one. Mrs. Dawson's eyes filled with tears. Yes, Your Grace. Have a tray sent to his room, and find him proper clothes, something simple. Nothing from, he caught himself, nothing from the nursery. Of course, Your Grace. Alexander walked away before she could see his hands shaking. The boy ate like he'd never seen food before. Alexander watched from across the table in the small breakfast room, untouched tea cooling in his cup. The boy had devoured 2 full plates of eggs, bread, and ham in the time it took Alexander to lift his cup twice. He ate with his hands with desperate efficiency, barely breathing between bites. Slowly, Alexander said, you'll make yourself sick. The boy froze, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. Guilt and fear flashed across his face. Sorry, sir, I'll go slower, I won't waste it, I promise. I'm not concerned about waste, I'm concerned about your stomach. Alexander set down his cup. When did you last eat? 2 days ago, maybe 3. The boy set the bread down, his hand still hovering over it protectively. We got 1 meal a day at the workhouse. Porridge, mostly, sometimes just water with bits in it. Alexander's jaw tightened. You're safe here, there will be more food, you don't need to hurry. The boy studied him with those impossible blue eyes. Then slowly he picked up the bread and took a smaller bite. He chewed, swallowed, waited. Good, Alexander said quietly. They sat in silence. Alexander watched the boy eat. Watched the way he held his fork awkwardly, unused to utensils but trying to be proper, trying to fit into this strange new world he'd stumbled into. Why did you help me? The boy asked suddenly. Alexander considered the question. Considered telling the truth that he'd seen a ghost in the boy's face, a birthmark that haunted him, eyes that belonged to his dead son. But he could not yet. You needed help, he said instead. I was able to provide it. Most men wouldn't have stopped their carriage. I am not most men. The boy smiled. It was small and brief, but it transformed his face. For just a moment, he looked like any child might look, hopeful, young, unburdened. Alexander's chest constricted. Can I ask you something, sir? You may. Why do you live in such a big house all alone? The question landed like a knife between Alexander's ribs. I'm not alone, I have staff. My cousin lives here as well. But no family, no wife, no children. The silence stretched. Alexander could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, could hear his own heart beating, could hear the sound of a child's laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for 7 years. I had a son, he said finally. He died. The boy's face fell. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Does it still hurt? Alexander looked at the boy, really looked. At his open face, his genuine concern, his complete lack of guile. At the way he tilted his head slightly when he asked questions, the exact way Thomas used to tilt his head. Every day, Alexander whispered. On the third day, Alexander found the boy in the music room. He had not given the child permission to wander the house. Had, in fact, instructed him to stay in his guest chamber unless summoned. But children, Alexander supposed, were not designed for imprisonment. He should have expected this. What he did not expect was the sound that drew him to the music room's open door. Piano music. Not skillful music. The notes were halting, uncertain, the melody broken by long pauses and missed keys, but it was music nonetheless. Someone was playing or trying to play Beethoven's Für Elise. Alexander stepped into the doorway. The boy sat at the grand piano, his small frame dwarfed by the massive instrument. His fingers searched across the keys, pressing down tentatively, hunting for the next note. He hummed along, his voice soft, as if the melody lived somewhere in his memory, but his fingers had to search for it. I didn't give you permission to be here, Alexander said. The boy jerked away from the piano, his face going white. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean. I heard the music in my head and I'll go, I'm sorry. Wait, Alexander stepped into the room. His heart was pounding. You said you heard the music in your head. Yes, sir, sometimes I hear things, songs, melodies, I don't know where they come from. The boy's hands twisted together. Am I in trouble? Can you play it again? The boy blinked, sir. The song, the one you were playing, can you play it again? Slowly, the boy turned back to the piano. His fingers found the keys. He played the opening bars of Für Elise, imperfectly, with mistakes, but the melody was unmistakable. Alexander's vision blurred. Thomas had been learning that piece. His music tutor had taught him the first section before the fire. He had played it constantly, proudly, making Alexander listen to it over and over during dinner, during breakfast, during every spare moment. Where did you learn that? Alexander's voice was barely controlled. I don't know, I knew it. My fingers knew where to go, is it wrong? No, Alexander moved closer. It's not wrong. Do you remember anything else? Any other songs? The boy's face scrunched in concentration. Then his fingers moved again. A different melody, simpler, a children's lullaby. The same lullaby Alexander used to sing to Thomas at bedtime. That one too, the boy said. I remember someone singing it, a deep voice, a man's voice. I can't remember his face, but I remember feeling safe when he sang it. Alexander had to grip the edge of the piano to stay standing. What else do you remember? Pieces, just pieces. The boy's voice grew frustrated. A big room with books, a horse, a gray horse with a white spot on her nose, a woman with kind eyes who wore black, a game with toy soldiers, red coats and blue coats. The red ones always won because, he stopped, his eyes widening. Because the general was braver, the red general, his name was. The boy pressed his hands to his head. I can't remember, it's like looking through fog. Alexander could barely breathe. The gray horse was Minerva, Thomas's riding pony. The woman in black was the governess. The toy soldiers, the red general had been Thomas's favorite. He had named it Wellington and insisted it could never lose a battle. Does any of this mean something to you, sir? The boy asked. You look strange. I'm fine. Alexander straightened, forcing control back into his voice. Continue practicing. You may use the music room whenever you wish. Really? Really? The boy's smile was radiant. Thank you, sir, thank you so much. Alexander left before the boy could see him break. Edmund arrived that evening. Alexander was in his study when he heard the familiar footsteps in the hall. His cousin entered without knocking, as he always did, his face arranged in an expression of concern. Alexander, what's this nonsense about a street urchin living in the house? Mrs. Dawson tells me you've given him the guest chamber. Have you lost your mind? He's a boy who needed help. I provided it. He's a beggar you picked up off the street. Edmund crossed to the decanter and poured himself a brandy. You can't simply bring home strays like some charitable spinster. What will people say? I don't care what people say. Well, you should. Edmund drank, eyeing Alexander over the rim of his glass. There are already rumors about your state of mind, about your obsession with the past. What rumors? That you see ghosts, that you sty. LL hear Thomas crying in the night, that you've turned this house into a mausoleum. Edmund's voice softened, becoming gentle in that way that made Alexander's skin crawl. Cousin, I worry about you. We all do. And now you bring home a boy who, he paused. Mrs. Dawson says he resembles Thomas. Alexander's hand tightened on his pen. Mrs. Dawson talks too much. Does he? Does he what? Resemble Thomas. The silence stretched between them like a blade. All children look alike to me, Alexander said finally. He needed shelter. I provided it. Tomorrow I'll make arrangements to place him with a proper family. Until then, he stays here. Edmund studied him. You're lying to me. I beg your pardon. You think he might be Thomas. Edmund set down his glass. Alexander, Thomas is dead. We buried him 7 years ago. I know you want to believe. I believe nothing. Alexander stood. The boy stays. That is the end of this discussion. For how long? As long as I decide. Edmund's expression hardened. You're playing a dangerous game. What game would that be? Hope. Edmund moved toward the door. Hope is the cruelest poison for a man who has already lost everything. When this boy inevitably proves to be nothing but a street urchin with a passing resemblance to your son, it will destroy what's left of you. Then that's my concern, not yours. Edmund paused at the door. I'm trying to protect you. And are you? Something flickered in Edmund's eyes. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing. Alexander turned back to his desk. Good night, Edmund. His cousin left, but Alexander sat in the silence afterward, thinking about fires and convenient accidents and a man who stood to inherit everything. The boy's nightmares started on the 5th night. Alexander was walking past the guest chamber when he heard it, a child's scream, sharp and terrified. He threw open the door without thinking. The boy was tangled in his sheets, thrashing, his face contorted in terror. No, no, please, the fire, the smoke, I can't breathe. Alexander crossed the room in 3 strides. He gripped the boy's shoulders. Wake up, you're safe, wake up. The boy's eyes flew open. For a moment, he didn't see Alexander. He saw something else, something that made him sob and claw at the air. Breathe, Alexander commanded. You're not there, you're here, you're safe. Slowly, awareness returned to the boy's eyes. He looked at Alexander, looked at the room, looked at his own hands as if confirming they were real. The fire, he whispered. I keep dreaming about fire, about smoke, about not being able to get out. Alexander's blood went cold. What fire? I don't know, I just remember. Flames, heat, someone carrying me, running, and then nothing, just darkness. The boy's voice shook. Why can't I remember? Why is everything so broken in my head? Alexander sat on the edge of the bed. He should not do this, should not get this close, should not let himself care. But the boy was shaking, and he was 11 years old, and he was terrified. Sometimes, Alexander said carefully, when something terrible happens, our minds protect us by forgetting. But I want to remember. I want to know who I am, where I came from, if I had a family. The boy looked up at him with those devastating blue eyes. Do you think I did have a family? I think, Alexander said slowly, that someone loved you very much and lost you, and has been searching for you ever since. How do you know? Because no child should be alone in this world. And you have the look of someone who was cherished once. The boy was quiet for a moment. Then, hesitantly, he asked, Can you stay, just until I fall asleep again? I don't like being alone after the nightmares. Every rational part of Alexander screamed at him to refuse, to maintain distance, to protect himself from the inevitable heartbreak. But he stayed. He sat in the chair beside the bed, and he stayed until the boy's breathing deepened into sleep. And then he stayed longer, watching the child's face in the moonlight, cataloging every feature, every similarity, every impossible detail. When he finally rose to leave, he found Mrs. Dawson in the hallway. She was crying silently, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. That's him, she whispered. Your Grace, I've served this family for 40 years. I know every Ashford that's ever lived. And that boy in there, her voice broke. That's young Master Thomas, I'd stake my life on it. You can't know that. I do know it, and so do you. She gripped his arm with surprising strength. What are you going to do? Alexander looked back at the sleeping child, at his son, at the ghost made flesh, at the impossible truth that was tearing his world apart. I'm going to find out what happened, he said quietly. And when I do, someone is going to pay for every moment of suffering that boy has endured. Mrs. Dawson nodded. I'll help you, whatever you need. Alexander returned. Ed to his own chamber. He did not sleep. Instead, he stood at his window, staring out at the east wing, at the charred corridors that held the answer to a question he'd been too broken to ask 7 years ago. Had there been a body in that room? Or had there only been ashes and lies? Tomorrow, he would begin asking questions. Tomorrow, he would start pulling at the threads of that night until the whole tapestry unraveled. Tomorrow, he would become a father again, or he would discover he'd been living in a delusion. Either way, the numbness was over, the cold was over, the 7 years of death were over. Alexander Winters, Duke of Ashford, was finally, terribly, devastatingly alive again. Edmund discovered the truth on the boy's 9th day at Ashford Hall. Alexander had been careful. He'd kept the child confined to the private family wing, away from public areas where Edmund might encounter him. But children were curious creatures, and Tommy had been raised on the streets where survival meant exploring every corner of your territory. The boy had wandered into the portrait gallery. Alexander was in his study when he heard Edmund's voice echoing through the halls, sharp, urgent, barely controlled. Alexander, Alexander, where are you? By the time Alexander reached the gallery, Edmund stood frozen before the family portraits, his face the color of ash. Tommy stood beside him, small and confused, looking up at a painting of a 4-year-old boy in a blue velvet suit. That's me, Tommy was saying, his voice filled with wonder. Isn't it? That looks just like me. It was Thomas, painted 6 months before the fire. The resemblance was undeniable. Edmund's eyes found Alexander's. In them, Alexander saw rage, terror, and something else, calculation. Your study, Edmund said tightly. Now. Alexander turned to Tommy. Go back to your room, please. But the painting. And now. The boy fled. Edmund paced the study like a caged animal. Alexander stood by the window, his posture rigid, waiting. How long? Edmund's voice shook. How long have you been harboring this fraud under your roof? 9 days. 9 days, Edmund laughed, a brittle sound. 9 days of letting some street urchin play dress up in Thomas's memory. Have you completely lost your mind? Watch your tone. Watch my tone? Edmund whirled on him. You bring home a beggar boy who happens to resemble your dead son, and I'm supposed to what? Applaud your judgment? This is madness, Alexander. Dangerous madness. He has the birthmark. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Edmund went very still. What? The Ashford mark on his left hand, in the exact same place Thomas had it. A coincidence. He plays Feur Elise. He remembers the toy soldiers. He knows the lullaby I sang to Thomas every night. Alexander's voice was low, controlled, but underneath it ran a current of something fierce. He has nightmares about fire, about being carried through smoke, about being taken. Edmund's face had gone from ash to chalk. You can't seriously believe. I don't know what I believe. That's why I'm investigating. Investigating what? A dead child? Edmund moved closer, his voice dropping to something almost pleading. Thomas died 7 years ago. We buried him. We mourned him. You cannot resurrect the dead by finding orphans who look like them. Then you have nothing to worry about. Nothing to, Edmund stopped. His expression shifted, hardened. You think I had something to do with it, with the fire. Did you? The silence between them was a living thing. I loved that boy, Edmund said quietly. I held him when he was born. I taught him to ride. When the fire took him, I wept for weeks. His voice turned cold. But I also inherited your responsibilities when you became a ghost. I manage these estates. I handle your business. I keep this family afloat while you drown in grief. And if that makes me suspicious in your eyes, then perhaps your judgment is even more compromised than I thought. Get out. Alexander. Get out. Edmund stared at him, then he straightened his coat and moved toward the door, but he paused at the threshold, his hand on the frame. That boy is not Thomas, he said, and when he's proven to be a fraud, when his real family comes forward, or when someone recognizes him as the workhouse rat he truly is, it will destroy you. I won't be able to put you back together this time. Then don't. Edmund left, but the poison he'd planted remained, spreading through Alexander's mind like ink through water. What if he was right? What if hope had made Alexander blind? What if the boy was just a boy? The rumors started within 2 days. Alexander heard them whispered in the servants' corridors, saw them in the way the footmen looked at him with pity. Mrs. Dawson reported that Edmund had been writing letters, lots of letters, to London, to distant relatives, to members of Parliament. He's gathering support, Your Grace, she said. Quietly building a case. For what? For having you declared incompetent. The words landed like a blow. On what grounds? Mental incapacity, grief-induced delusion, paranoia. Mrs. Dawson's hands twisted her apron. He's telling everyone you've lost your mind, that you're seeing your dead son in street children, that you've become a danger to the family legacy. Alexander's jaw tightened. Let him try. But the doubt crept in anyway, in the quiet moments, in the space between Tommy's smiles and Alexander's desperate hope. What if Edmund was right? What if Alexander had become so desperate to fill the void that he'd created a fiction from coincidence? The birthmark could be random. The memories could be from any childhood. The resemblance could be just that, resemblance. He found himself watching the boy more critically, looking for flaws in the theory, searching for proof that this was all a terrible mistake. Tommy noticed. Have I done something wrong, sir? The boy asked one evening at dinner. His voice was small, uncertain. No. You've been different, quieter. You don't smile anymore when I play piano. Tommy set down his fork. Are you tired of me? That's not, Alexander stopped. I'm not tired of you. Then what is it? How could he explain? How could he tell this child that every smile, every gesture, every moment of connection was both a gift and a torture? That Alexander was terrified to believe and equally terrified not to. Nothing, he said finally. Eat your dinner. But Tommy had learned to read the spaces between words. His face fell. He ate in silence. The formal accusation arrived on the 15th day. It came in the form of a legal document delivered by Edmund's solicitor. Alexander read it in his study, his hands steady, his face a mask. Petition for investigation into the identity and legitimacy of the minor child, currently residing at Ashford Hall. Edmund had done his work well. The document outlined a case built on interviews with workhouse officials, testimony from street orphans who claimed to know Tommy, and affidavits from 3 separate physicians who stated that birthmarks were common and proved nothing. The petition called for a formal hearing, for testimony under oath, for medical examination and documentation. And if the boy could not prove his identity to the satisfaction of the court, he would be returned to the workhouse. And Alexander would be declared mentally unfit to manage his own affairs, with Edmund appointed as his guardian and conservator. It was brilliant, vicious, comprehensive, and it would take place in 3 weeks. Alexander sat alone in his study, the document before him, and felt the walls closing in. To fight this, he would need proof. Real proof, not just hope and coincidence. He would need to prove that Thomas had survived the fire, that someone had taken him, that the death had been staged. He would need to prove the impossible. The door opened. Tommy stood there, his face pale. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, sir, but I heard men talking outside. They said, the boy's voice cracked. They said I'm a fraud, that I'm lying to you, that I'm trying to steal your money. You're not. They said you'll be ruined if you keep me here, that your cousin will take everything, that people think you're crazy. Tears welled in Tommy's eyes. I don't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. Alexander stood. You haven't hurt me. But I have just by being here, by looking like. Tommy wiped his eyes roughly. I should go. I should have gone days ago, before all this started. You're not going anywhere. Why? The boy's voice rose, desperate and angry. Why are you doing this? I'm nobody, just some workhouse rat with a lucky face. Your cousin is right. I probably just remind you of your son and you've made yourself believe. Stop. No, Tommy's hands were shaking. I can't remember, don't you understand? I can't remember who I was before. Maybe I'm not anyone special. Maybe I'm just broken. Maybe my brain made up all those memories because I wanted to believe I came from somewhere better than an alley. Tommy, what if I'm lying to you? What if I'm lying to myself? The boy was crying now, hard sobs that shook his thin frame. What if I'm not your son? What if I'm nothing? The words hung in the air between them. Alexander crossed the room. He knelt before the boy, bringing himself to eye level. He gripped Tommy's shoulders gently but firmly. Listen to me, he said. I don't know what you are. I don't know what happened 7 years ago. I don't know if you're my son or a stranger or something in between. His voice roughened. But I know this, you are not nothing. You are not a fraud. You are a boy who survived something terrible, who endured things no child should endure, who learned to play piano by memory and who knows lullabies that no one taught you. But that doesn't mean. It means you matter, regardless of who you were, regardless of WH. At your name is, you matter. Alexander's grip tightened. And I will not let them send you back to that workhouse. Do you understand me? I will fight them. I will fight all of them. Why? Tommy whispered. Why would you do that for me? Because you might be my son. Because you have his eyes and his smile and his soul. Because I buried my heart 7 years ago and you brought it back to life. But Alexander could not say those things. Not yet, not until he was certain. Because it's right, he said instead. Tommy looked at him for a long moment. Then, Hesitantly, the boy leaned forward and wrapped his arms around Alexander's neck. It was a child's embrace, desperate, trusting, complete. Alexander's arms came up automatically. He held the boy, held him tight, and felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd built to protect himself, crumbling under the weight of this impossible, fragile hope. "I'll try to remember," Tommy whispered against his shoulder. "I'll try so hard to remember, I promise." "I know you will." They stayed like that for a long time. Man and boy, Duke and orphan, father and son maybe, or maybe just two broken people clinging to each other in the dark. That night, Alexander made a decision. He summoned Mrs. Dawson to his study. "I need you to find someone for me, someone who was here the night of the fire, someone who might have seen something, anything." "Your Grace, most of the staff from that time has moved on, and those who remain have already been questioned." "Question them again, dig deeper, look for inconsistencies." Alexander's voice was steel. "Someone knows something, someone always knows something, find them." "Yes, Your Grace." "And Mrs. Dawson, be discreet. If Edmund catches wine that we're investigating." "He won't, I'll be careful." She paused at the door. "Your Grace, that boy loves you. Whether he's Master Thomas or not, he loves you. I see it in how he looks at you." "I know." "Do you love him?" The question was impertinent, inappropriate, but Mrs. Dawson had earned the right to ask it. "Yes," Alexander said quietly. "God help me, yes." The next morning, Tommy was gone. Alexander found the note on the breakfast table, written in careful, childish script. "Dear Sir, I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. Your cousin is right. I'm probably just a boy who looks like someone you lost. I'm sorry I made you hope for something impossible. You've been kinder to me than anyone in my whole life. I'll never forget you. Thank you for everything. Tommy." Alexander read the note 3 times. Then he crushed it in his fist and roared for his horse to be saddled. The boy had a 4-hour head start. But Alexander was a duke with resources, connections, and a desperation that burned like fire in his veins. He would find him. He would find his son. Because that's what Tommy was. Alexander knew it now with a certainty that transcended proof or logic or reason. The boy was his blood, his child, his Thomas. And no one, not Edmund, not the courts, not God himself, would take him away again. He mounted his horse and rode into the dawn, chasing ghosts and hope and the impossible truth that refused to stay buried. Have you ever had to choose between what everyone tells you is true and what your heart knows is real? Drop a comment. This Duke is about to make that choice. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Alexander found Tommy 3 hours later, huddled beneath a bridge on the outskirts of the estate. The boy was soaked through from the morning rain, shivering, but his jaw was set with determination. "I'm not going back," Tommy said as Alexander dismounted. "You can't make me. I'm not here to make you do anything." "Then why are you here?" Alexander stood in the rain, looking at this impossible child who'd turned his world inside out. "Because I choose you. Whatever you are, whoever you are, I choose you." Tommy's face crumpled. "But your cousin can go to hell." Alexander held out his hand. "Come home, we'll face whatever comes together." The boy stared at the offered hand. Then, slowly, he took it. They rode back to Ashford Hall in silence. But when they arrived, Edmund was waiting on the steps with 3 constables and a magistrate. "There he is," Edmund said, pointing at Tommy. "The fraud who's been living in my cousin's house. Arrest him." "On what charge?" Alexander demanded, dismounting but keeping Tommy behind him. "Theft, impersonation, attempting to defraud a peer of the realm." Edmund's face was cold triumph. "The hearing has been moved forward, Alexander, to today. Lord Chancellor Pemberton is waiting in the Great Hall with half of Yorkshire's nobility. It's time to end this farce." Alexander's blood ran cold. "You can't." "I can, I did. The boy will testify under oath as to his real identity, or he'll be taken to prison for contempt." Edmund smiled. "It's over, cousin, accept it." The Great Hall had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom. Lord C.H. Anseller Pemberton sat at the head table, his powdered wig and crimson robes marking him as the crown's representative. Flanking him were three other magistrates, their faces stern and unforgiving. The gallery was packed with nobles, peers who traveled from their own estates to witness the Duke of Ashford's public humiliation. Alexander entered with Tommy at his side. The boy's hand was ice cold in his. The Duke of Ashford, Pemberton announced, stands accused of harboring a fraud and perpetrating a deception upon this assembly and the crown. We are here to determine the identity of the child in question and whether his grace is of sound mind to manage his affairs. He turned to Tommy. Boy, state your name. Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas. Thomas what? I don't know, my lord. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Pemberton's eyebrow rose. You don't know your own surname. I can't remember, my lord. I have gaps in my memory. How convenient. This came from Edmund, standing at the prosecutor's table with his solicitor. Gaps that allow him to be anyone, to claim anything. Proceed with your evidence, Mr. Winters, Pemberton said. Edmund stood. My lords, gentlemen, I present testimony from St. Mary's workhouse. He gestured, and the workhouse master stepped forward, a pinched man with cruel eyes. Mr. Grimsby, please tell the court about the boy called Tommy. Grimsby bowed. That boy there came to us 4 years ago, my lords, a street orphan, no family, no name, common as dirt. We took him in out of Christian charity. And his origins. A prostitute what died in the gutter, most like. We get dozens like him every year. Tommy flinched. Alexander's hand tightened on the boy's shoulder. I also have testimony, Edmund continued, from 3 physicians who examined the boy's birthmark. Dr. Harrison. An elderly physician stood. The crescent-shaped mark on the boy's hand is a common dermatological occurrence. I've personally documented 17 similar cases. It proves nothing of lineage. And finally, Edmund said, his voice rising, I present the death certificate of Thomas Winters, signed by the coroner 7 years ago. Cause of death, fire. The child is buried in the family plot. This boy cannot be him because Thomas Winters is dead. He placed the document on the table with a flourish. Pemberton studied it. Your Grace, do you have any evidence to counter this? Any proof that this child is who you claim? Alexander stood, his mind raced. He had nothing. No birth records, they'd burned in the fire. No witnesses to Thomas's birth besides Mrs. Dawson, whose testimony would be dismissed as a loyal servant. No scientific proof, no documentation. Nothing but a certainty in his bones that this was his son. I have, Alexander began. Your Grace, the doors to the great hall burst open. Mrs. Dawson stood there, her dress mud-splattered, her hair wild. Beside her was an elderly woman Alexander didn't recognize, bent with age but with eyes sharp as knives. Mrs. Dawson, this is highly irregular, Pemberton started. This woman has testimony, my lord, critical testimony. Mrs. Dawson practically dragged the old woman forward. This is Mrs. Beatrice Fletcher. She was the midwife who delivered Master Thomas 11 years ago. The room went silent. Pemberton gestured, let her speak. Mrs. Fletcher's voice was thin but clear. I delivered that boy, the Duke's son, and I'd know him anywhere. She pointed a gnarled finger at Tommy. That's him, that's the baby I brought into this world. On what basis do you make this claim? Edmund demanded. You haven't seen him in 11 years. I know him by the mark on his hand, and by something else. Mrs. Fletcher moved closer to Tommy. May I see your left foot, child? Tommy, confused, lifted his foot. Mrs. Fletcher removed his boot and sock. On the bottom of his foot near the heel was a small scar, pale and old. That scar came from the birth, Mrs. Fletcher said. The cord was wrapped wrong. Cut him when I freed him. I put 3 stitches there myself. She looked at Pemberton. How many street orphans would have the same scar in the same place as Thomas Winters? The same birthmark, the same face? Edmund's face had gone white. She's lying. The Duke paid her to. I've brought my records. Mrs. Fletcher produced a worn ledger. Every birth I've attended in 40 years. including Thomas Winters, born March 15, 1838, mother deceased in childbirth. Father, Alexander Winters, Duke of Ashford, distinguishing marks, crescent birthmark on left hand, birth scar on left heel. She handed the ledger to Pemberton. He read it, his expression unreadable. This proves the boy was born to the Duke, Pemberton said slowly. But it does not prove this boy is that boy. The Duke's son died in a fire 7 years ago. Did he? Mrs. Dawson stepped forward now. My lord, I have questions about that fire. Questions I should have asked 7 years ago. And such as why the governess died, but her body showed no signs of trying to escape. Such as why no remains of the child were ever found, only ash. Such as why the fire started in the middle of the night when candles should have been extinguished. She turned to Edmund. And such is why Mr. Edmund Winters insisted on conducting the search of the wreckage himself, why he refused to let anyone else examine the scene, why he was so quick to declare the child dead. Are you accusing me? Edmund sputtered. I'm saying someone should have asked these questions 7 years ago. Mrs. Dawson's voice rang through the hall. I'm saying a child doesn't simply vanish into ash without a trace. I'm saying something happened that night that we were too grief-stricken to investigate properly. This is slander, Edmund shouted. Then explain this. A new voice came from the back of the hall. Everyone turned. A woman stood there, middle-aged, plainly dressed, her hands twisting nervously. She looked terrified but determined. Who are you? Pemberton demanded. My name is Ruth Parsons, my lord. I was the housemaid in the East Wing 7 years ago. I was dismissed 3 days after the fire. Alexander's heart stopped. I never dismissed you. No, your grace. Mr. Edmund Winters did. He gave me £50 and told me to leave Yorkshire. Told me if I ever spoke of what I'd seen, I'd hang for arson. The room erupted. Pemberton slammed his gavel. Order, Mrs. Parsons, what did you see? Ruth's voice shook. I saw Mr. Edmund Winters in the nursery the night before the fire. Late, near midnight. He was with a man I didn't recognize, rough-looking, not a gentleman. They were talking in low voices. When they saw me, Mr. Edmund grabbed my arm, told me I'd seen nothing, told me to keep my mouth shut. That proves nothing. Edmund was sweating now. I was checking on the boy, that's all. Then why did the fire start the very next night? Ruth's voice grew stronger. Why did the governess die in a hallway when she should have been in her room? Why was there no body found? And why? She pulled a letter from her pocket with shaking hands. Why did I receive this letter 3 weeks after the fire, from a man named Silas Crow, asking if I wanted to earn more money by keeping silent about the package he delivered that night? She handed the letter to Pemberton. He read it, his face darkening. Who is Silas Crow? A smuggler, my lord, Ruth said. Works the docks, known for moving cargo that people want to disappear. Alexander's world tilted. Cargo, you mean? I mean children, your grace. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. I didn't understand it then. I was too frightened, but I've thought about it every day since. Mr. Edmund paid that man to take Master Thomas. The fire was just a cover, to make everyone think the boy had died. Where did he take him? Alexander's voice was raw. I don't know, your grace. I swear I don't know. Tommy had been silent through all of this, standing frozen beside Alexander. Now he spoke, his voice small and lost. I remember being carried, he said, through smoke, but not fire, just smoke, and a man's voice saying, quiet now or they'll hear. And then a carriage, a long ride, and then nothing, just darkness and waking up somewhere else. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Edmund had taken Thomas, had paid someone to drug him, to carry him out during the staged fire, to sell him or hide him somewhere far away. The governess had likely discovered the plan and been killed for it. The fire had destroyed the evidence. And Edmund had inherited everything, the estate, the title, responsibilities, the power. He had murdered a child's life to gain a fortune. Every eye in the hall turned to Edmund. His face was a mask of rage and terror. This is a conspiracy. These women are lying. The Duke has paid them all too. Enough, Pemberton's voice was ice. Mr. Winters, you will remain here under guard until a full investigation can be conducted. If these allegations prove true, You will hang for kidnapping, conspiracy to murder, and fraud. Two constables moved toward Edmund. He backed away, his composure finally cracking. You don't understand, he said desperately. I had nothing. Alexander had everything: title, wealth, legacy. And then his wife died and he still had an heir. Still had someone to carry on the name while I had nothing but debts and dead children. His voice rose to a shriek. It wasn't fair, none of it was fair. Take him, Pemberton ordered. The constables seized Edmund. He fought them, screaming obscenities, all pretense of civility gone. Alexander didn't watch. He knelt before Tommy, gripping the boy's face in his hands. Thomas, he whispered, my son, my Thomas. The boy, his son, his impossible, miraculous son, looked at him with those blue eyes that Alexander had mourned for 7 years. Papa, the word was hesitant, hopeful, broken. Yes, Alexander pulled H. I am close, felt the boy's arms wrap around his neck. Yes, I'm here, you're safe now, you're home. And in the great hall of Ashford, surrounded by witnesses and nobility, and the ruins of his cousin's betrayal, the Duke of Ashford held his son and wept. The formal inquest took 3 days. Lord Chancellor Pemberton ordered a full investigation, transforming Ashford Hall into a theater of justice. Magistrates occupied the library. Constables searched every room. Witnesses were brought in chains or on promises of immunity. And through it all, Alexander kept Thomas, he would call him Thomas now, damn what anyone said, at his side. The boy had not left his presence since the revelation. At night, Thomas slept in Alexander's chambers, curled on a cot beside the great bed, waking with nightmares that Alexander soothed with whispered reassurances. During the day, they sat together in the study while testimony was recorded, evidence catalogued, and the full scope of Edmund's crimes slowly emerged from 7 years of darkness. On the third day, Pemberton reconvened the assembly in the Great Hall. The room was packed, not just with Yorkshire nobility now, but with representatives from the Crown, the Church, and the medical community. This was no longer a simple matter of a disputed inheritance. This was kidnapping, conspiracy, attempted murder of an heir to a dukedom. This was treason. Alexander entered with Thomas's hand firmly in his. The boy wore proper clothes now, a dark blue suit that Mrs. Dawson had hastily commissioned. His hair had been cut and washed, his face scrubbed clean. He looked like what he was, a young lord, thin and haunted, but undeniably noble. Edmund sat in chains at the defendant's table. 3 days in a cell had stripped away his veneer. His face was unshaven, his clothes rumpled, his eyes wild with the desperation of a cornered animal. Pemberton banged his gavel. This inquest will come to order. We are here to establish, beyond reasonable doubt, the identity of the boy called Thomas and the crimes, if any, committed by Mr. Edmund Winters. He turned to his clerk. Present the medical evidence. Dr. Whitmore, the royal physician, stood. He was a serious man with steel-gray hair and a reputation for scientific rigor. In his hands, he held a thick folder of documents. My lords, I have spent the past 3 days conducting a thorough examination of the boy. I have compared his physical characteristics to the birth records provided by midwife Fletcher, to portraits of the late Duchess and the young Thomas, and to the Duke himself. He opened the folder. First, the crescent birthmark on the left hand. Mrs. Fletcher's records indicate this mark was noted at birth. The boy possesses it in the exact location described. He produced a sketch showing the mark's precise position and dimensions. Second, the birth scar on the left heel. Again, noted in Mrs. Fletcher's records. The boy possesses a scar in the exact location, consistent with a stitched wound from infancy. Another sketch. Third, I examined bone structure, eye color, facial architecture, and dental patterns. I compared these to known characteristics of the Winters bloodline. Dr. Whitmore looked directly at the assembly. The boy possesses the Winters jaw structure, the distinctive eye color that appears in portraits of 3 generations of dukes, and dental spacing identical to the duke's own childhood records. He paused, letting this sink in. But most significantly, I examined the boy's hands. Dr. Whitmore gestured, and Thomas, shy but obedient, held up his hands. The Winters family has a documented hereditary trait, a slight webbing between the third and fourth fingers of the right hand. It appears in the Duke. It appeared in his father. It appeared in portraits of young Thomas before the fire. Dr. Whitmore moved to Thomas, gently spreading the boy's fingers. There, clearly visible, was the slight membrane of skin connecting the two fingers. This trait appears in less than 1% of the population. For this boy to possess it, along with the birthmark, the scar, the eye color, the bone structure, and the precise physical characteristics documented in Mrs. Fletcher's birth records, is beyond the realm of coincidence. The room was silent. "It is my professional opinion," Dr. Whitmore said, "that this boy is Thomas Winters, son of Alexander Winters, Duke of Ashford, and furthermore that he has been subjected to trauma consistent with long-term deprivation, malnutrition, and psychological abuse." A murmur ran through the assembly. Alexander felt Thomas squeeze his hand. He squeezed back. Pemberton nodded. "The medical evidence is compelling. Now let us examine the crime itself." He gestured to the constable. "Bring in Silas Crow." The doors opened. Two guards dragged in a man in irons, rough, scarred, with the look of someone who'd spent his life in London's darkest corners. This was the smuggler, the man who'd carried Thomas. Into the night, Crow was thrown into the witness chair. He glared at the assembly with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Crow," Pemberton said coldly, "you have been offered immunity from the hangman's noose in exchange for truthful testimony. I suggest you make use of this opportunity." Crow spat on the floor, then slowly he began to speak. "Yeah, I took the boy, 7 years ago. Edmund Winters paid me £500 to do it." His voice was rough as gravel. "He said the kid was an orphan, said he was doing the family a favor by removing an inconvenient bastard. I didn't ask questions, money's money." "What were your instructions?" Pemberton asked. "Take the boy during the confusion of the fire. Give him laudanum to keep him quiet. Deliver him to a woman in Liverpool, a baby farmer named Agnes Moore. She'd handle the rest." Crow's eyes flickered to Thomas. Kid was supposed to disappear. Into a workhouse, into the sea, didn't matter, as long as he never came back. Then the fire. Edmund said it himself, used lamp oil and rags in the corridor. Killed the governess first. She'd figured out something was wrong, was asking too many questions, bashed her head in and left her body in the hallway to burn. Crow's voice was matter of fact, recounting horror like a grocery list. "I waited in the garden. When the smoke started, I went in through the servants' entrance. Boy was already drugged. Edmund had put laudanum in his evening milk. I just carried him out, put him in my cart, and drove north." Thomas had gone rigid beside Alexander. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Alexander pulled him closer, shielding him. "And this woman, Agnes Moore," Pemberton pressed. "Dead now, died 2 years back, but I found her records." Crow nodded to the constable, who produced a ledger. "She kept logs of all the children she placed, for insurance, like, in case anyone came asking." The ledger was handed to Pemberton. He read aloud: "Thomas, age 4, delivered May 1842. £50 received. Child placed with workhouse, St. Mary's, London. Told them he was mute orphan with no memory. They never asked questions." The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with sickening clarity. Edmund had orchestrated everything, had murdered the governess to silence her, had drugged his own nephew, had paid Crow to steal Thomas away, had set the fire to destroy evidence, had declared the boy dead and assumed control of the estate. And Thomas, small, trusting, 4-year-old Thomas, had woken in a stranger's cart, drugged and terrified, his memory scrambled by trauma and laudanum, had been sold to a baby farmer like livestock, had spent years in a workhouse, forgotten and alone, while his father grieved and his would-be murderer lived in luxury. "Mr. Edmund Winters," Pemberton's voice cut through the horror, "do you deny these accusations?" Edmund's face was a twisted mask of rage and fear. "That man is lying. He's been paid to lie. This is all a conspiracy too." "We found your payment ledgers," Pemberton interrupted. £500 withdrawn from your account in May 1842, the exact amount Mr. Crow described. "That was for business." "We found letters." Pemberton produced them, yellowed with age. "Hidden in your chambers, correspondence with Agnes Moore. instructions about the boy, threats to expose her if she ever spoke. Edmund's mouth worked silently. We found the apothecary who sold you laudanum the day before the fire. He remembers you specifically because you bought such a large quantity. I needed it for. And we found the lamp oil in the garden shed, the same type used to start the fire, with your fingerprints on the can. The evidence piled up like stones on a grave. Edmund's grave. With each revelation, he seemed to shrink, his composure crumbling piece by piece. You murdered an innocent woman, Pemberton said, his voice ringing through the hall. You kidnapped a child, you faked his death, you stole an inheritance. You let your cousin suffer unspeakable grief for 7 years while you lived off his estate. And when that child, against all odds, found his way home, you attempted to destroy him again. I had nothing. Edmund's voice cracked into a scream. Nothing. My children died, my wife died, I was left with debts and a decaying estate and a cousin who had everything handed to him. The title, the wealth, the son, he didn't deserve it. I worked for that estate, I managed it, I saved it from his grief-stricken neglect. It should have been mine. So you killed for it. I didn't kill anyone. The governess was an accident. She fought me. I didn't mean. Edmund stopped, realizing his mistake. The room exploded in shocked murmurs. Edmund had just confessed to murder. Pemberton's face was stone. Edmund Winters, I find you guilty of murder, kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud, and high treason against the crown. You will be stripped of all titles and properties. You will be hanged by the neck until dead. And may God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none. The gavel fell like an executioner's axe. Edmund collapsed in his chains, sobbing. Guards dragged him away. His screams echoed through the hall, pleas for mercy, protestations of injustice, the incoherent babbling of a man watching his world end. Alexander felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This man had stolen 7 years from him, had stolen his son's childhood, had murdered an innocent woman, had condemned Thomas to hell. Hanging was too kind. When Edmund was gone, Pemberton turned to Alexander and Thomas. His expression softened, the first warmth Alexander had seen from the stern magistrate. Your Grace, I am prepared to issue a formal declaration, but I believe the boy should hear it directly. He stood, drawing himself to full height. The entire assembly rose with him. Thomas Winters, Pemberton said, his voice carrying through the now silent hall, you are hereby formally and legally recognized as the legitimate son and heir of Alexander Winters, 7th Duke of Ashford. Your name is restored. Your birthright is restored. Your place in this family and in the peerage of England is restored. Pemberton produced a document, an official decree, stamped with the royal seal. Furthermore, the Crown extends its deepest apologies for the suffering you have endured. You are a victim of heinous crimes, and you have survived with courage that honors your bloodline. He looked at Alexander. Your Grace, the Crown returns your son to you. May you both find the peace that has been so cruelly denied. Alexander could not speak. His throat was too tight, he simply nodded. But Thomas, small, brave Thomas, found his voice. Thank you, my lord, he said quietly. I don't remember much about being a duke's son. I don't know if I'll be any good at it, but I'll try. I promise I'll try. Pemberton's stern face cracked into something almost like a smile. I suspect, young lord, that you will be extraordinary. The assembly dispersed slowly, nobles approaching to offer congratulations, apologies, and thinly veiled curiosity. Alexander accepted their words with mechanical politeness, his hand never leaving Thomas's shoulder. Mrs. Dawson appeared, tears streaming down her face. She dropped into a curtsy before Thomas, her voice choked with emotion. Welcome home, Master Thomas, welcome home. Thomas looked uncertain. Then, hesitantly, he reached out and took her hand. Were you kind to me before? I loved you like my own grandson. Then please don't cry. I'm all right now, we're all right now. Mrs. Dawson pressed his hand to her cheek and wept harder. Dr. Whitmore approached last, his medical bag in hand. Your Grace, I recommend extended rest for the boy. His body has endured significant stress. Good food, warm lodgings, gentle exercise. And patience with his memories, they may return slowly or not at all. The trauma was severe. I understand. Alexander looked down at Thomas. We have time now, all the time in the world. That evening, after the last noble had departed and the hall was finally quiet, Alexander took Thomas to the portrait gallery. They stood before the painting of 4-year-old Thomas in his blue velvet suit. The boy studied his younger self with fascination. I remember that suit, he said softly. It was itchy, I hated wearing it. Alexander's heart clenched. You complained about it constantly. Did I? Thomas tilted his head. I remember you laughing. You had a nice laugh, deep and warm. I haven't laughed much in 7 years. Thomas looked up at him. Maybe you could start again, now that I'm home. Alexander knelt, bringing himself eye level with his son. He took Thomas's face in his hands, memorizing every feature, every freckle, every impossible detail. You are home, he said. You are safe, and I swear to you on my life and my honor that nothing will ever hurt you again. Do you believe me? Thomas searched his father's face, then slowly he nodded. Yes, Papa, I believe you. The word Papa landed like absolution, like resurrection, like every prayer Alexander had screamed into the darkness for 7 years, finally answered. He pulled Thomas into his arms and held his son, his miracle, his impossible, beautiful, broken, surviving son. And in the portrait gallery of Ashford Hall, surrounded by the faces of ancestors who had watched over their bloodline for generations, the Duke of Ashford finally allowed himself to believe in hope again. 3 weeks after the inquest, on a quiet spring morning, Alexander found Thomas in the East Wing. The boy stood in the doorway of what had been the nursery. The room had been sealed since the fire, its charred walls and blackened floorboards left untouched as a monument to grief. Now, in the pale morning light, it looked less like a tomb and more like a wound that needed healing. I wanted to see it, Thomas said without turning. The place where it happened, where I stopped being. Me. Alexander's chest tightened. He had not entered this room in 7 years, had not been able to face it. But now, with Thomas beside him, he stepped across the threshold. The air smelled of old smoke and decay. Soot still stained the walls in dark streaks. The remains of furniture, a charred bed frame, a melted toy soldier, fragments of what had been a rocking horse, lay scattered like bones. Thomas walked to the window. He touched the sill, his fingers tracing patterns in the ash. I don't remember the fire, he said quietly. I remember being sleepy, so sleepy I couldn't keep my eyes open, and then darkness, and then waking up in a cart that smelled like fish and blood. His voice remained steady, factual, as if recounting someone else's story. I cried for you, for days, I think. I kept saying, Papa, over and over until the woman told me to shut up or she'd give me something to really cry about. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. The urge to destroy something, to tear down walls, to ride to London and dig up Edmund's corpse just to kill him again, burned through him like fire. But Thomas needed him calm, needed him present, not drowning in rage. I'm sorry, Alexander said, his voice rough. I should have protected you, should have questioned the fire, should have torn England apart looking for you instead of accepting. You thought I was dead. Thomas turned to face him. You buried me, mourned me. How were you supposed to know? I should have known. A father should know when his child is still breathing. You're not magic, Papa, you're just a man. Thomas said it simply, without accusation. And Edmund was clever. He made everyone believe, even me. For years, I thought I was nobody, just Tommy the orphan. I didn't know I had a father who loved me, who wanted me. The words hit Alexander like physical blows. I never stopped wanting you. Never stopped, his voice broke. I buried my heart the day we buried that empty coffin. I thought I had nothing left to feel. I was wrong. Thomas's eyes, those impossible blue eyes, filled with understanding beyond his years. You feel things now. Too much, everything, it's… Alexander struggled for words. It's like being frozen for 7 years and then being thrust into fire. I don't know how to be your father anymore. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, Thomas admitted. I don't remember how to be a son. Not a real son, anyway. At the workhouse, we didn't have parents. We had masters who hit us when we were slow and fed us when they remembered. I know how to survive. I don't know how to be loved. The confession hung between them, fragile and devastating. Alexander crossed the room. He knelt before his son, bringing them eye to eye. He took Thomas's hands, small, scarred hands that had endured things no child should endure. Then we'll learn together, he said. We don't have to pick up where we left off. We can't. You're not 4 years old anymore, and I'm not the man I was. We're both different now, broken in different ways. Is that bad? No, Alexander squeezed his son's hands gently. It just means we build something new, not what we had before, but something that fits who we are now. Thomas searched his father's face. What if I'm not what you wanted? What if I'm too damaged? Too strange? I have nightmares every night. I flinch when people move too fast. I hoard food under my bed because I'm scared there won't be more. I'm not a proper Duke's son. You're my son, that's all that matters. But I'm broken. So am I. Alexander's voice was fierce now. Thomas, I have spent 7 years as a ghost. I stopped feeling, stopped living, stopped being human. You think you're the only one who's broken? You think surviving that workhouse makes you less worthy? He pulled Thomas closer. You are the bravest person I know. You survived hell and came out the other side still capable of kindness, still capable of trust, still capable of calling me Papa even though I failed you. You didn't fail me. I did. I should have protected you. Should have seen Edmund for what he was. Should have. Stop. Thomas's voice was small but firm. Please stop punishing yourself. It hurts to watch. Alexander froze. Thomas, you look at me sometimes like you're seeing a ghost, like you can't believe I'm real, like you're waiting for me to disappear. Thomas's eyes glistened with tears. I need you to see me, not who I was, not the boy in the paintings, me, the person I am now. The words cut through every defense Alexander had left. He truly looked at his son, not at the ghost of a 4-year-old, not at the painting in the gallery, not at the child he'd lost. He saw Thomas, 11 years old, too thin, too haunted, but alive, real here. A boy who played piano from memory and hoarded bread under his bed, who had nightmares about smoke and woke up fighting invisible monsters, who had learned to survive in hell but still knew how to smile. W.A. O called him Papa, even though they were strangers learning to be family. I see you, Alexander whispered. I see you, and you are extraordinary. Thomas's face crumpled. The tears he'd been holding back finally fell. Alexander pulled him into his arms. Thomas clung to him with desperate strength, his small body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. 7 years of grief and fear and loneliness pouring out all at once. I was so scared, Thomas choked out. So scared all the time, I thought I'd die there. Thought I'd never have anything good again. And then you stopped your carriage and you looked at me like I mattered. You do matter, you are everything. I wanted to be your son so badly. Even before I knew, even when I thought it was impossible, I wanted it so much it hurt. Alexander's own tears came now, hot and unstoppable. He held his son and wept for the years they'd lost, for the childhood stolen, for the nights Thomas had cried alone in the dark while Alexander mourned a ghost, for all the moments they should have had and never would. But also for this, for now, for the impossible miracle of holding his son again. They stayed like that for a long time, father and son, two broken people learning to be whole. When the tears finally subsided, they sat together on the charred floor of the old nursery. Thomas leaned against Alexander's side, exhausted but calmer. Will you tell me about her? Thomas asked quietly. My mother, I don't remember her at all. Alexander's throat tightened. She was sunlight, that's what I remember most. Everywhere she went, she brought light. He smiled sadly. She had your eyes, your smile. She used to sing while she worked. Terrible voice, completely off-key, but she didn't care. Did she love me? More than anything, she died bringing you into this world, but her last words were asking if you were safe, if you were breathing, if you were perfect. Alexander stroked Thomas's hair. I told her yes, told her you were the most perfect thing I'd ever seen. She smiled and said, good. Take care of him, Alexander. He's going to be extraordinary. Thomas was quiet for a moment. I wish I could have known her. So do I. She would have loved you so much, would have torn the world apart to protect you. Alexander's voice hardened. She would have known, would have suspected, would never have let Edmund near you. But she wasn't here, and you did the best you could. Thomas tilted his head up to look at his father. Are we going to be all right, Papa? Eventually. Alexander looked down at his son. At this impossible boy who had survived hell and still had the courage to ask if they'd be all right. Who still had hope after everything hope had cost him. Yes, Alexander said and meant it. We're going to be all right. It won't be easy. We'll both have nightmares, bad days, moments where the past pulls us under, but we'll face them together. Together, Thomas repeated, testing the word. I like that. And me too. They sat in silence, watching dust motes dance in the morning light. The nursery didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like something else, something waiting to be transformed. I want to rebuild it, Thomas said suddenly. This room, I want to make it something new, not forget what happened, but not let it stay a wound forever. Alexander considered this. What would you make it? A library, maybe, with windows that let in lots of light, and comfortable chairs, and a piano. Thomas's voice grew stronger, more certain. A place where good things happen, where I can learn and grow and become whoever I'm supposed to be. I think that's perfect. Will you help me? Every step of the way. Thomas smiled, really smiled, for the first time since they'd entered the nursery. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows, letting the light through. Alexander saw his wife in that smile, saw hope and resilience and a future that wasn't defined by the past. I love you, he said, the words coming easier now. I never stopped, even when I thought you were gone, even when I tried to stop feeling anything at all, you were always in my heart. Thomas leaned into him. I love you too, Papa. I think I always did, even when I couldn't remember why. They sat together as the morning deepened into afternoon, and when they finally left the East Wing, they left it together. Two broken people who had found each other against impossible odds. Two survivors learning to be a family. The past could not be changed. The years could not be recovered. The suffering could not be undone. But the future was unwritten. And for the first time in 7 years, Alexander Winters, Duke of Ashford, believed that the future might actually be worth living. 1 year later, on a spring morning bright with promise, Alexander stood in the doorway of what had been the East Wing nursery. The charred walls were gone now. In their place stood floor to ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Sunlight streamed through new windows, falling across a grand piano in the corner, and two comfortable chairs positioned near the fireplace. The room smelled of beeswax and paper and possibility. Thomas sat at the piano, his fingers moving across the keys with growing confidence. He was playing Für Elise perfectly now, without hesitation. His music tutor, a patient woman from London, had pronounced him a natural talent. Alexander suspected it was less talent and more muscle memory, the echo of lessons from a lifetime ago finding their way back. The boy had grown in the past year. He was taller, healthier, his frame filling out with proper food and care. The haunted look in his eyes appeared less often now, though the nightmares still came on dark nights, but they came less frequently. And when they did, Alexander was there. Papa, are you just going to stand there? Thomas called without stopping his playing. You're supposed to be helping me with Latin. Alexander smiled, something he did often now, to the shock of everyone who had known him during the dark years. I got distracted by the music. It's the same piece I've been practicing all week. I know, I never get tired of hearing it. Thomas finished the piece with a flourish and turned on the bench. He wore the silver locket around his neck now, the one with the curl of golden hair that had rested on an empty coffin 7 years ago. Alexander had given it to him on his 12th birthday, 3 months after the inquest. Thomas had cried when he opened it, understanding what it meant, what it had cost his father to keep all those years. Mrs. Dawson says the guests are arriving for dinner, Thomas said. Do I really have to attend? Lord Pemberton makes me nervous. He's coming specifically to see you. He wants to discuss your education, Cambridge or Oxford. I'm only 12. You're also reading at a university level. Latin, Greek, mathematics, history. Your tutors say you're extraordinary. Thomas made a face. They have to say that, you're paying them. They say it because it's true. Alexander crossed the room and sat in the chair beside the piano. You've worked incredibly hard this year, Thomas. You should be proud. The boy was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently tracing the keys. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That I live here, that I'm your son, that I'm not going to wake up back in the workhouse. You're never going back there. I tore that building down 6 months ago. Thomas's head snapped up. You what? Bought the property, had it demolished. It's a park now, with a fountain and benches and flowers. Alexander's voice was matter of fact, though the project had cost him a fortune. No child will suffer there again. Thomas stared at him, then slowly he smiled. You're a bit terrifying when you're being kind, you know that. I'll take that as a compliment. They sat in comfortable silence. Through the window, Alexander could see the estate grounds stretching out in green magnificence. The gardens had been replanted, the stables expanded, the tenant cottages repaired. Ashford Hall was alive again, buzzing with purpose and warmth. Edmund's execution had taken place 9 months ago. Alexander had not attended, had no desire to watch the man who'd stolen his son's childhood meet his end. But he'd received the official notice from the Crown. Edmund Winters, condemned traitor, had been hanged at dawn on a gray October morning. His body had been buried in an unmarked grave outside the prison walls. That chapter was closed. Papa, Thomas's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever wish that I remembered more about before? Alexander considered the question carefully. Sometimes, I wish you remembered your mother, remembered the man I was when I wasn't broken. But Thomas? He reached out and took his son's hand, turning it palm up to reveal the crescent birthmark. This mark used to make me think of death, of loss, of the day I buried an empty coffin. He pressed his thumb gently to the mark. Now when I see it, I think of miracles, of impossible hope, of the day a boy knocked on my carriage door and brought me back to life. Alexander met his son's eyes. You don't need to remember who we were. We're building something better. Thomas's eyes glistened. I think I'm the luckiest person in England. That makes two of us. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Dawson appeared, her face warm with affection. Your Grace, Lord Pemberton has arrived. And young master, your Latin tutor sent word that she's very pleased with your progress on Cicero. See, Alexander said to Thomas, extraordinary. Thomas rolled his eyes but couldn't hide his smile. As they rose to greet their guests, Alexander paused to look around the transformed room one last time. This space had been a tomb, a monument to grief, a wound that W. couldn't heal. Now it was a library, a sanctuary, a place where his son studied and played and grew into the remarkable young man he was meant to be. The past couldn't be erased. The scars would always remain. Thomas would always carry the trauma of those lost years, and Alexander would always carry the guilt of not finding him sooner. But they had this, they had now, they had each other. And that was enough. As Alexander and Thomas descended the grand staircase together, father and son, duke and heir, Alexander thought about the man he'd been 7 years ago, the one who'd stood in the snow beside a grave, burying his heart, swearing never to love again. That man had been wrong. Love doesn't die, even when we bury it. It waits. It endures. It survives in the spaces between heartbeats, in the echo of a child's laughter we can no longer hear, in the desperate hope we're too afraid to name. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, love knocks on our carriage door in the form of a ragged boy with impossible blue eyes and a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. Truth has a way of finding us when we least expect it, of refusing to stay buried no matter how deep the grave, of returning to us in forms we don't recognize until the moment we do. Alexander Winters had lost his son to fire and treachery and lies. But his son had found him anyway. And in finding each other, they had both found their way home. If this story of a father's love and a son's survival moved you, if you've ever been given a second chance you thought was impossible, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, Would you have recognized your child after years apart? What moment in this story hit you hardest? Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories of love that refuses to die and truth that refuses to stay buried. And remember, sometimes the greatest miracle isn't what we find, it's who finds us.